Hello, and welcome to MAGA, the podcast. Now, this is not your racist uncle's MAGA. Our MAGA stands for I'm an angry asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. If this doesn't make sense, go ahead, check out the red hat in the thumbnail. It'll all come together. The mission of this podcast is to explore how Don the Con bamboozled our nation. Why? Because we want to make sure the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028. We want to make sure it stops before it becomes unstoppable and our democracy devolves into a dictatorship. Now, it's been only a few weeks since Trump 2.0 started, and it's already a fucking nightmare. So if we want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it started and why it spread. We need to go back to Trump 1.0 and the 2016 election, because everything horrible that's happening right now started back then. So who am I and why am I leading this journey? My name is a disgusted American, and there are two things I bring to the table. First, I'm a talented storyteller. I was in the development programs at both CBS and Warner Brothers. And second, I'm a bit of a social doctor. I've spent over 18 years as a management consultant, having to deal with all kinds of social problems that come from people, systems, and power. So I hope I can use my skills to help us make sense of this cult of MAGA, the mess that we're in, via storytelling and problem solving, so we can sort out how to get out of this nightmare. In our last episode, The Big Bad Wolf, we talked about how Trump entered the race right before he was going to be fired from The Apprentice. At the time, his finances were a mess, and he needed a new way to make a lot of noise and get attention. And so he became the Big Bad Wolf, a very time-honored role in modern American politics where you're supposed to scare people to the chosen hero. And in 2016, that was supposed to be Jeb Bush. Typically, the Big Bad Wolf dies of starvation because no political machine is there to feed it. But in this case, the Big Bad Wolf didn't starve. And so the question is, who fed him? So in this episode, we're going to answer the question, who fed the Big Bad Wolf and why? This episode will help us get closer to undoing the cult of MAGA by identifying the first seeds of the cult. Where did it start and why did it work? We are going to do this by revisiting the dark days of the original petty, paranoid, authoritarian president, and how this maniac's legacy led to the hatred and the vengeance of his disciple, the Prince of Darkness, who ultimately spawned the Tangerine Palpatine that we all love to hate. Now, this part of the journey will also help us unravel how to form the foundation of an authoritarian cult. So if we want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it began and why it spread. This is going to help us figure out how to stop it. Because at this point, the MAGA thing has grown way past politics. It's a cult now, folks. And the methods for stopping a cult are different because cults are based on faulty beliefs and feelings. They're not based on facts. And that's why fact-checking and logic are not working here. Feelings don't give a fuck about facts. So to understand how the Prince of Darkness got so twisted, you got to understand his master. His master was a deranged megalomaniac. He was super paranoid. Here's what he thought about Jewish people.
Jews are born spies. You know something different. You just in it, up to their necks.
That's right. Jews are born spies. They're in it up to their necks. This guy actually recorded all of the dark, twisted thoughts in his mind for future reference, like normal people do. He was also ruled by vendettas and feuds.
In this atmosphere of us versus them, Colson's office began an ever-expanding list of Nixon's critics, the enemies list. Its object was to screw our political enemies. Reporters and politicians, educators and entertainers were barred from the White House. Some were targeted for tax audits. Others were trailed by private detectives.
And it was very shortly thereafter that Nixon authorized the plumbers, the creation of a special group to stop leaks, and they began to take extra legal steps and put into motion the mechanism which ultimately resulted in the downfall of the administration.
He kept a master list of his enemies, and he used the tools of the state to harass and destroy those that defied him. That seemed familiar? He also loathed the media. In fact, he's the one that even started calling them the media. Before this president, they were known as the press, but he wanted them to sound more ominous. And just in case there's any lingering doubt about the extent of his disdain for the press, here it is again from his own recordings in his own words.
The press is the enemy. The press was the enemy. The press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Write that in the blackboard 100 times and never forget.
So this man was willing to break the rules to get what he wanted. He ordered illegal wiretaps on the phones of journalists, instructed FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to assemble information on homosexuals in the Capitol Press Corps, and he instructed aides to develop and distribute damaging stories about reporters to just kill the sons of bitches, in his words. When challenged about his blatant disregard for the law, he replied,
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. By definition. Exactly.
and these words would come back in full force 40 plus years later when the Supreme Court of the United States essentially gave the president the power to do pretty much whatever the fuck he wants. Now, listening to all this, you're probably thinking he's got to be talking about Trump. But in this case, we're not. We're talking about the other paranoid, petty, insecure psycho, wannabe dictator, Darth Nixon, aka Richard Milhous Nixon. And when Nixon fell, one of his most fanatical disciples vowed revenge. The man called himself the Prince of Darkness, and one day he would feed the starving big bad wolf and get revenge for his disgraced master. So the framework we're going to use to help make sense of all this in this episode is known as the command and control pyramid structure of authoritarian cults. You can see the diagram in the show notes if you want to see the details, but it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a pyramid where at the tippity top, we have the cult leader or the aspiring dictator who anoints themselves as Lord and Savior. Now, the first task of an aspiring dictator is to find loyal lieutenants. Every group needs their minions. And these minions, these lieutenants, are going to help identify, link, and organize the fringes who are most susceptible to joining a cult, a place where outcasts can feel like they belong. So come on over here, boys and girls. Gru will take good care of you. Let the recruiting begin. So without further ado, let's meet the Prince of Darkness.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prince of Darkness, Roger J. Stone.
He gave himself this nickname because he thought it'd be good for his aura.
Roger doesn't want to be considered a sweetheart. He's going to be considered, the Prince of Darkness. And if he dies with that on his tombstone, I think he'll consider himself a success.
In appearance, he looks like a Bond villain. Natty suits, shockingly dyed white hair, a weightlifter's physique, flashy round sunglasses, for some reason the same horrendous shade of orange as his protege, Donald Trump. Doesn't care much for socks. And finally, a giant tattoo of Nixon's smiling face on his upper back.
The Nixon tattoo is really all you need to know about Roger, because he thinks Nixon's approach to politics, the toughness, the win-at-all-cost mentality, that's what Roger reflects.
So yeah, this guy capes for Nixon pretty damn hard.
His mother once said, "You're not a Catholic. Your religion is the Republican Party and your God is Richard Nixon."
In fact, according to him, the first person to imagine a Trump presidency was not him, but Nixon. He told C-SPAN in 2017 that back in the 80s, Trump and Nixon bumped into each other at Yankee Stadium. And the next day, Nixon called him and said, well, I've met your man. I got to tell you, he's got it. He could really go all the way. Now, is this story true? Who knows? Like Trump, this guy is known for being stunningly full of shit. According to Edward J. Rollins, who worked with Stone on Reagan's 1984 campaign, you can only trust about 10% of what he said, and he always needed adult supervision. Sound like anybody else we know? Now, Stone was once a Republican establishment darling. He made his bones as a teenager working for Nixon. His group was actually called CREEP. Can't make this shit up sometimes. So he served in Reagan's 80 and 84 campaigns, and then he started what we will describe as a very unique lobbying firm.
Stone was the shit. It was the biggest, most powerful lobbying operation in Washington. We did things that nobody else had ever done.
Now, this firm helped presidents get elected, and then they sold access. Before Black Manafort and Stone, this practice was viewed as highly unethical.
Black Manafort and Stone, in their brazenness, really created the modern sleazeball lobbyist. They elected people. As soon as those people were in office, they turned around and lobbied them. And so they crossed a line that hadn't been crossed. Washington's been worse for it ever since.
So by the mid-1990s, Roger Stone had it all. He had money, esteem, a cowboy lobbying firm that pissed on ethics and raked in millions of dollars. Things would be glorious forever.
Some of the tabloids say a Republican strategist, Roger Stone, a partner in the prestigious Washington lobbying firm of Davis, Manafort, and Stone, has been advertising for sex in swinger magazines along with his wife, Nadia.
After that, Roger was cast from the light into the shadows. Back then, apparently, being a sexual deviant was a problem. Nowadays, perverts, weirdos, and tinfoil hatters can be members of the president's cabinet, or as Trump would describe them, the most qualified candidates. But back then, when Roger was cast out, he said, I'm not a member of the club. I like to take long shots. I like to take risk. He began to see himself as an outcast, and he christened fellow outcasts like Nixon and a fellow named Roy Cohn as his heroes. In fact, Roy Cohn was his key to meeting the big bad wolf.
I had a lawyer who was a very good lawyer, tough lawyer, named Roy Cohn. He introduced me at one point to Roger Stone. Roy thought Roger was a very tough guy. Roy knew some very tough guys, I will tell you that. But Roy always felt that Roger was not only tough, but a smart guy and very political.
So the relationship between the Prince of Darkness and the Big Bad Wolf goes back to the 1980s when Roger started his lobbying firm. Trump was one of his first clients. When Trump wanted to quash Indian casino competition, he turned to Stone. As for their political ties, they actually tried this whole president thing before, back in 2000. But that campaign was a train wreck, and they didn't get very far.
Businessman Donald Trump announcing today he too will switch from the GOP to the Reform Party and may even seek its presidential nomination. And if he does, he says, it will not be just a publicity stunt for his empire of office buildings, casinos, and hotels. He will run to win, he says, despite his reputation.
When Donald Trump announces that he's going to run, it completely throws everything into chaos.
George, should the American people take the Reform Party seriously?
Well, not if Donald Trump is their leader.
Although they are longtime friends, they tend to clash a lot. A former White House aide describes both of them as being insecure. And as any woman could tell you, there are a few things in the world more vicious than an insecure man. So in this episode, we explore the initial rise of the Prince of Darkness, how Watergate made him a name, working with Reagan made him a force, and starting a maverick lobbying firm made him a fortune. And then we uncovered his shocking fall, the sex scandal that pushed him from the light and into the shadows, and how afterwards, through the nefarious Roy Cohn, he meets a brash bruiser named Donald Trump that he thinks can be his ticket to redemption. But their first foray into this, their first campaign in 2000, becomes an unmitigated disaster. So how will the Prince of Darkness turn the tide? How can he make a blowhard bully into the beloved savior of the American people? We'll dive into that question in our next episode, the last part of our series on Roger Stone. The episode will be entitled The Prince of Darkness Part 2, Perfecting the Snake Oil, where we will explore how Stone found the perfect snake oil recipe to make Donald Trump a desirable candidate to the American fringe. And that's all we got for this week's show, folks. As always, appreciate you tuning in. And if you want to help out the channel, subscribe or follow the podcast and tell your fellow disgusted Americans about us so they can find us too. Look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao, Bacala.